This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 772, recorded Wednesday, February 28th. Raspberry Pi from the man himself. This week, Elliot Williams joins me, and we talk with Eben Upton about the Raspberry Pi, the Raspberry Pi Foundation, a potential IPO, and we get some feature requests in for some future projects. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Welcome to FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, and open source software and hardware. Well, for today, it's about hardware too. It's not just me, of course. We've got Elliot Williams, the editor-in-chief here at Hackaday. And Elliot, what is this madness?
What is this madness? Which madness are you speaking of?
Well, it's FLOSS Weekly, and we have Elliot here. We have a Hackaday person on FLOSS Weekly.
Well, it's Inception, because
Yes.
FLOSS Weekly is now on Hackaday.
It's Hackaday all the way down.
It is.
Well, today we've got a super special guest, and this may explain why we've got Elliot here. We've got Eben Upton of Raspberry Pi Foundation, the Raspberry Pi, the business, pretty much just all around the Raspberry Pi guy, and sort of one of our heroes here, I think. One of mine, at least. I'm not sure if I want to bug him about looking like Jason Statham. I feel like that joke has sort of run its course. He gets it a lot, I feel like. Elliot, you're obviously, I'm sure you have probably 15 Raspberry Pis within arm's reach, right?
I think 10's probably about the right number if I'm looking around here, but I might be edging close to 15, especially. And so, yeah, if we get to play good cop, bad cop, or software guy, hardware guy, I get to play hardware guy. And if you count the microcontrollers, if you count the recent RP2040 microcontrollers, then 15 is a ridiculous underestimate.
Yeah.
But, just Raspberry Pi single board Linux computers, probably good dozen.
Yep. Well, let's not dally anymore. We've got the man himself. Let's bring Mr. Eben Upton onto the show. Welcome, sir.
Good to be here.
Now, is it Eben or is it Eben? How is that actually?
It's Eben. It's Eben. It's like Ebenezer.
Okay.
It's I'm the most miserable guy at Christmas. So yeah, it is. It's I'm not Ebenezer, but it's pronounced that way.
Yeah.
You're
Ebenezer after the story. Is it?
So I'm Ebenezer after a bunch of old Welsh guys who my dad met in Wales while my mum was pregnant. So I have a it's a good solid. Wales is a Christian but not a Catholic country. So they want biblical names that aren't saints' names, and there actually aren't a huge number of those available.
I can imagine.
And Ebenezer is one of them.
I like it actually.
Solid.
All right, so we're here to talk about Raspberry Pi, and normally the first question that we ask people is to give us the 30,000-foot view, like, what is your project about, for people that don't know about it. But at this point, I don't think we have any listeners that don't know what the Raspberry Pi is, because it's everywhere, and it's sort of in everything. And yes, we were not kidding when we said that we have just randomly Raspberry Pis around, from the 1 to the 4. I've even got a Raspberry Pi 5, the newest one, over there, and let's talk about that for a minute. I don't know, maybe give us the quick sales pitch. What's the upgrades in the Pi 5? Like, why would we want to reach for that one over the Pi 4?
Well, this is kind of a fun day, almost a fun day to be talking. So history fans will remember that we launched the product on the 29th of February, 2012. So tomorrow's our third birthday, which is super exciting, and we've come a long way in 3 years. And I guess the pitch for Raspberry Pi 5 is, I think that's how it works. I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
We did math live on camera. This is always a bad idea.
That's it. I mean, the pitch really is more. I mean, the interesting thing about Raspberry Pi is over the kind of the course of the kind of the history of the Raspberry Pi single board computer. I guess qualitatively the board hasn't really changed very much, right? It kind of does the same thing, right? It's got some memory, it's got some processing power, it's got the ability to drive a display, it's got some USB, some GPIO, Ethernet. The only real qualitative change to the board was in 2016 with Raspberry Pi 3, where we added wireless, right? So we added Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and pretty much everything else that's happened to Raspberry Pi on the hardware side over the years has just been a question of more. And I guess Raspberry Pi 5 kind of continues that tradition of more. It's about it's somewhere between, it's on the 3 end of we say 2 to 3x the performance of a Pi 4. I think it's kind of on the 3 end for most use cases. It's kind of on the 3 end of that. That makes it about 100, depending how you count, it makes it about 150 times the performance of the 2012, of the February 29th 2012 product. So it's kind of a further turning up at the dial. I guess in terms of, we've always seen ourselves, the majority of Raspberry Pis are used in embedded, what you consider to be embedded applications. But there's still, because of our history of trying to get young people excited about computing, there's still a real history of us seeing ourselves as a client PC company. We've been calling ourselves a client PC company since that very first device. I guess this is the one, if you think Raspberry Pi 4 was the first device which was really credible, particularly for web browsing, was really credible as some compromises client PC. Probably, at least for me, Raspberry Pi 5 is the one that pushes you over into not noticing that it isn't a regular. That isn't a regular PC. So those, although it's this kind of continuous increase in performance over the 12 years, there are kind of milestones. It sort of feels there are milestones that you go past, and that's probably for me is the one where when I sit down in front of one, 10 minutes later I'm like, oh, I'm using a Raspberry Pi. That's probably the milestone that we went past with this product.
Yeah, I ran an experiment when the Pi 4 came out and used it as my main desktop for several days, if not a week. Yeah. And there were a few things that would drive you nuts about it, but for the most part, it just worked. You talk about milestones, though, and there's something in the Pi 5 that I think is maybe a game changer in the same way that adding Wi-Fi was, or maybe even more than that. And that's the exposed PCI Express port.
That is
huge.
You're right. That is a huge change, and it is that is a genuinely new feature. Obviously, in the Pi 4 generation, you could have PCI Express if you were using we had a single lane of PCI Express that was on the SBC product, was connected to the Via Labs USB XHCI controller and hub. And if you're using the compute module 4, you would have access to that. That chip wasn't on there, so you had access to PCI Express. I guess the thing that's happened in the Pi 5 generation is we have enough PCI Express that we can both use it on the board. I guess we'll talk about RP1 in a moment. So we can use it on the board to communicate with the I/O processor, but we also have a lane left over that we brought to this connector.
Yeah. When I first saw that, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't broken out as an NVMe on the Pi 5 itself. I think I've kind of warmed up to your approach because it does give a little bit more flexibility. But what was the
nice thing is you talk about flexibility. There is that sort of feeling that we haven't got our first party. There will be a first party adapter board that we trailed fairly soon. We haven't got ours in the market yet, but there's a bunch of other people. And what's interesting about the other people's is all of these different. It's some people have made ones that go underneath. Some people have made ones that go on top. I saw some people who've made one that will take has two M2 sockets on, so you can RAID, and it has a switch, has a PCI Express switch on there, and you can RAID a couple of devices together. So it's interesting that there is some. It happens all the time with the Raspberry Pi, right? We try to do the kind of the minimum. We try to do the kind of the core product, the thing where we think we add some value, and then you see the community, the ecosystem, the business, and enthusiast ecosystem around the product kind of go and then explore what can be done with the features we provided. Yeah,
that is super interesting stuff, and I'm hoping we get to talk a little bit more about that, the third-party stuff. But there's a pair of questions that I really want to get in, and I'll hand it over to Elliot and let him ask some. But let's talk about the. So I've got a CM4 here. I understand the CM5 is coming, which I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
And then what I've not heard about is there a Pi 500 coming? And 500. Please tell me that it's got an NVMe port in it.
So let's see. We don't talk about unannounced products. Of course, we do talk a little bit about unannounced products in this generation. I think what we always say. I don't know if you've read. There's a book by Neil Stephenson called Cryptonomicon, in which somebody challenges the hero about. I think they're laying fiber optic in the Philippines, and she says to him, "Are you going to lay some more fiber optic in the Philippines?" And he says, "Well, people in business seldom plan to do something once because it messes up the spreadsheets, and I wouldn't want to mess up the spreadsheets." So I think there are obviously Pi 400 has been a really successful product for us, actually. I mean, it's probably the clearest. It's the clearest hardware instantiation. If you think of all the investments we've made in Raspberry Pi OS as being the kind of software instantiation of our belief that we are a client PC, actually going and building something which is unambiguously a PC and a keyboard, unambiguously a client PC, that's the kind of hardware instantiation of that feeling that we have about ourselves. And so I think it would be surprising if we didn't. We still feel that way, so I think it would be surprising if we didn't try and do something in that space at some point.
So I've got my Pi 400 here, which happens to have this little CyberDeck attachment from Adafruit, which is great. Yeah. So two things about this. Since I have you here, if I were to give you a wish list for the Pi 500, and of course I'm sure you have a lot of people that ask you
Let me get a pen.
Okay. It's only two things. First off, I would love to see a real NVMe port on it somewhere. Because running an OS from an SD card is just a painful experience. And two, I would
depends on the SD card, but yes. They're not all created equal. But yes,
I've bought the ones that are supposed to be nice, and still it can be a painful experience. And then two, so many people do stuff like build CyberDecks out of them. I would love to see some built-in mounting options, like maybe a VESA mount on the bottom or some threaded inserts on the back of it, so that you can hang hardware off of it and it be a little less janky. So those are my two wish list items for the Pi 500.
Okay. Well, I do still just about have a functioning memory, medium-term memory. So I don't know that. I mean, that's good input, and certainly the NVMe thing. The presence of that PCI Express lane is a really important part of the platform. It's something that obviously will be exposed on CM5. We've released some forward guidance. Well, we don't talk about future products for CM5. Obviously, we've wanted to, because of the lead times associated with, particularly when people are designing baseboards. One of the sort of direction of thinking was, well, people are designing CM4 based products all the time, and if we know some stuff about what CM5 is going to be like, and it is going to be very much like CM4, but there are always changes from generation to generation, we should totally write those things down, because it could be that 10 minutes of work from somebody today will mean that they designed a product that you can drop a CM5 into, rather than having to spin a PCB. So if you go to the product information portal, PIP, there's what we call CM5 forward guidance, which is really kind of notes for CM4 baseboard designers to maximize compatibility.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, speaking of CM4 and CM5 and the 4s and the 5s, one of the things I noticed when I started playing around with my 5 was that it kind of does need the fan. And that's just, I guess, a consequence of, well, it doesn't need it. And this is something actually that I've always loved about Raspberry Pis, is that you can run them at
quite good at not melting.
And the old 4, the 4 and the CM4, I played around overclocking them. And, you can do stupid things like overclock it with extra voltage and no cooling whatsoever, and the thing just throttles itself down. It doesn't burn up. Nothing bad happens, but as long as it can run, it does run. And you throw a tiny bit of aluminum on it, and then it runs beautifully.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the interesting thing, because that a fully throttled, Pi 5 is so much faster than Pi 4. That a fully throttled Pi 5 is a lot faster than a heavily overclocked Pi 4, right?
Exactly, it still runs.
And so my daughter, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and her first PC is a Raspberry Pi 5 on her desk in her bedroom. And because I'm a lazy dad, I haven't actually got round to fitting a case or an active cooler. It's just been sat there on the sides for the last 12 weeks, and she doesn't notice, and honestly, I mean, she doesn't put her finger on it, But
Yeah.
but she doesn't notice. She did pile a bunch of clothes on top of it the other day. I'm looking at thinking, I am glad that we made those investments in the thermal throttling software. But it is a platform which is designed. When people say, obviously the platform performs better if you want to run it under heavy load, you want to cool it because it'll stop it from throttling. Yep. But there is this. I have this. When people say there's a problem with Raspberry Pi because it gets hot, that's not quite right. But it's designed to get hot because that's how thermodynamics works. The way you get
there's
rid of
no
energy,
way to pack so many gates into such a small space without it getting warm. That's life, right?
And the way thermodynamics works is you can only shed heat to your environment if you're hotter than your environment. And so this is people say, oh, the CPU's got up to 80 degrees. Well, 80 degrees is broadly nothing by silicon standards. So the silicon is closed to 125 degrees. Right. The PMIC, I think, the PMIC probably out to 150 degrees, certainly the core logic to about 125. So you're not even beginning to explore the edges of the operating regime of the design at 80 odd degrees. It's really about finger safety. It's really about not getting so hot that you can't put your finger on it and then get your finger off it before you burn yourself. Yeah?
Right. And we were talking also about the Pi 400. I love your idea, Jonathan, of putting Visa mounts on it because I actually we have two Pi 400s in the house. One is my son's first computer, so mission accomplished. That worked out very well. My wife actually bought it for him without even consulting me. I thought that was kind of sweet. The other one is in the basement driving my CNC machine, and they're perfect for that too. It's kind of light duty work, but then I can fire up a browser and download stuff, and absolutely beautiful for that sort of application, except it's just sitting there on the desk, and it would be so awesome if it had screws on the back. But now that you mention it, Jonathan, I'm just going to make a little base plate for it and glue something to it. That's
where would you put the screws? Would you put the screws in the back, or would you put the screws in the base? I guess that's the question.
Honestly, I'd love to see both. So my thought with that.
So I know how much threaded inserts cost. So I'm going to ask you to pick one.
Yeah, I'd put the threaded inserts in the red underbelly, in the raspberry colored underbelly. Right.
I would
1, 2, 3, 4.
I would say whichever is easier because people can make it work either way. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm thinking of is like you can then buy a little LCD from Waveshare and put it on there, make it hinged, and make your own little tiny laptop out of our Raspberry Pi 500. And you can make that work from either place. So I guess probably the bottom is where it would make most sense. To be
more mechanical,
you probably got more fat to play with.
Right.
Probably in terms of the layout. Interesting. Okay, look, that's great input, and I will go and have a chat with. I'm going to have a chat with people, and if and when we decide to do a Pi 500, that's a useful bit of data.
All right.
Non-binding suggestion. But I like it.
I mean, I'll be disappointed. I'm not sure I signed anything before this. Exactly. If I have signed up to implement anything you tell me, then I will. My board of directors will be a little bit disappointed with me, I think.
The other thing that especially has been hitting Hackaday has been the RP2040. And, so I see Raspberry Pi moving in these kind of two different directions at the same time. There's the obvious evolution, like you say, of the single board computer version, but then kind of out of left field comes this microprocessor, this microcontroller with just from my perspective, absolutely stunning, unique, and interesting peripheral set. And I actually used it on our badge.
Cool.
For the Hackaday Super Conference, and I made extensive use of the PIOs and the DMA stuff, and made this crazy 6-stage pipeline of one PIO feeding into the other, and I actually did decimation and bit flipping and stuff in it, and it was tremendously useful for things you'd otherwise use programmable logic for.
I love that somebody built it's two favorites. One, somebody did a Commodore 64 external cartridge, which had no CPU. Both CPUs were just sat in WFI, and it was doing all of the grabbing the two phases of the address, going and doing the data fetch from memory, to effectively DMAing. Aggregating them, DMAing them out into a DMA control block, triggering that DMA to go get the data from a 16K aligned bit of memory inside the device, and then presenting it on the bus. And the whole thing was done using this kind of interlocking set of DMA engines and PIO state machines, which is kind of fun. And then somebody obviously inevitably did a processor with it. I think I remember that write-up of someone managed to do a kind of AVR8 level of performance kind of a processor, which was just built out of DMA chaining.
Oh, fun. Yeah, I mean, for our application, it was superb because it did all the like high bandwidth stuff for us. And then we had both cores free for people to play around with. And one of them was running kind of system stuff. And the whole other core was just like, here, you write your code on it, people at the conference, go have fun. And that was a beautiful separation, and it was just lovely.
Yeah, and if you sort of think, I mean, so Raspberry Pi kind of comes from originally from this kind of, it does come from an AVR8 world, right? So the first things I built in 2006 were kind of, can I build an 8-bit computer, an 8-bit equivalent level of performance with just with an AVR8 and a bit of SRAM? And can I generate video addresses, and can I it's kind of built this whole world on this piece of Vera board, right? And then this was sort of, I'd spent probably a year, 6 months maybe, after the end of my PhD, I was kind of burnt out, kind of just futzing about with AVR8, and it's a great architecture, right? Because it's it's got a high level of performance for the price, for the time, and for the price. It has very low latency access to the real world from code. And so there's always that sort of feeling that I could go and buy an AND gate, or I could just program an ATtiny to read 2 pins, AND them together, and then out them to another pin. It's not a bad AND gate, actually. So you've kind of got that kind of very low latency access to the outside world. You also have very deterministic access to the outside world, so you actually can cycle count. So my toy was generating video signals, and generating video signals out of an AVR is kind of a popular hobby, right? And so really, when you look at RP2040, what's the genesis of RP2040? It's like, well, can we recreate some of that immediacy and determinism and high performance interfacing in a modern 32-bit environment, in an ARM-based 32-bit environment? And so you think, okay, let's put a M0. Let's put M0 Plus down, and let's connect it at low latency using SIOB to connect it at low latency to the GPIOs. Okay, that's quite nice. It's quite a nice thing. Well, but one of the things that sucked when you were doing this AVR world, very informed by the 2006 Raspberry Pi, actually, one of the things that sucked was that you would only run your application code in H blank and V blank, and you'd be there all the time during the display period, just generating video addresses. So, perhaps I'll put another core down. That could be the application list, back to your idea of having one core running infrastructure maintenance stuff and one core running application codes. Let's have an application core and let's have this core. Well, okay, but they're going to contend. If they're both addressing the same memory inside the chip, they're going to contend. So let's put a bunch of different banks in, let's split our SRAM on the chip into a bunch of different banks, and let's put a crossbar between them so that you can, as long as you're not addressing the same bit of SRAM, then the two can run concurrently. And so that's kind of like, that's the overall structure. 2 processors, multi-ported SRAM, and then fully connected crossbar in the middle, and that's an enormous amount of bandwidth. Actually, you add up all the bandwidth inside the chip. There's almost as much bandwidth inside an RP2040 as there is in a 2835, as there is in the original Raspberry Pi application processor. And this is kind of a bunch of application processor guys rocked up and designed a microcontroller, right? And then the PIO is the last bit where you say, it's a bit of a waste of an M0 Plus to be bit banging a UART, isn't it? I wonder if we could make a magic, and of course everybody perennially, and this must have happened 1,000 times in the history of computing hardware, everyone tries to design, that machine that could be a SPI or a UART. But the interesting thing about PIO is because we had so many people work on it over such a long period of time, and they were all bringing their own contributions to it, hardware people, software people, what you ended up with was something which is incredibly abstract and flexible, and had been used in-house to do probably 10 or 15 protocols before it went out in the world, and then it went out in the world, and it had been used to do DVI. It had been used to do DVI inside the organization, but the moment I knew that we had something special with PIO was about a week after launch. Someone took the DVI example, where DVI is differential So there's a piece of software that occupied most of an M0 Plus that converted, basically just bit doubled, just converted 0 to 0, 1 and 1 to 1, 0. Someone took the example and said, yeah, but you guys have got this thing. There's a feature called sideset in PIO, which lets you set some pins. In addition to pushing data out, you can also just set some pins. And what they said, well, you've got zero latency branching, and you've got sideset. So he said, you can just have a 2-line program which does an out. It does a branch. It does a computed branch. It consumes 1 bit from the input bit stream, does a computed branch with either instruction 0 or instruction 1. And then the first instruction, they're both computed branch instructions. And the first one has a side set of 0, 1, and the second one has a side set of 1, 0. And so the program counter is just lashing backwards and forwards between the two, and all of the work is done by the side set. And that was the point where I'm like, this is not something we thought of doing, and yet someone has found a material improvement to what we thought was a pretty cool example, right? Someone's found a material improvement to it. So PIO, we quite love PIO actually.
I did this I2S thing with the clocks as well, and there you need a really high speed clock, and then you need 2 other clocks that are divisions of it, and the side set pins are absolutely perfect for that, to shove
really
data along through on these clock timings. It was a piece of cake. I mean, it took me a few days to get my head around the assembly language, which is really neat and interesting and very compact, but also very powerful once you see a few examples. And a lot of people have got good worked examples out on the internet, and I custom cobbled together an I2S thing that actually worked.
Yeah, and there were some, there are some wonderful examples of. I mean, for me, 6502 assembly language. I entered your 1K contest. I love these. Probably 6502 assembly language. Actually, the shader processor instruction set for Video Core 4, which I designed and have written some substantial programs in. And also the other one I really enjoy is Pentium 1. It's Pentium 1 UV pipelining, where you have it's superscalar, but it's kind of a very fixed superscalar where you have 2 pipes that execute synchronously with each other. And they're all examples, that and PIO code, they're all examples of places where you kind of put in effort and get rewards. It's little serotonin cookies. 6502 is great for this. I mean, you will look at. I had the privilege of working with Sophie Wilson at Broadcom for a long time, who wrote BBC Basic and then designed the original ARM instruction set architecture. And the story was with her BBC Basic ROM, there would be 16K ROM, and there'd be 1 byte left, and someone would report a bug to her, and she would work all day, and at the end of it, she'd fix the bug, and there'd be 1 byte left. And it's just that anything that gives you those, you sit there for half an hour, a byte, serotonin. I just love it. And PIO's like that. It's wonderful to have made a thing, or to have been around, actually, while such a thing was made, I think would be a fairer attribution of credit.
So it seems like this would be a good place to talk about the other sort of PIO solution, the RP1. Kind of a big milestone, I think, for Raspberry Pi. And an interesting little chip. Let's chat about the RP1 for a minute.
It's fun, right? So this is so for the first time we have a big Raspberry Pi. So for the first time we have a big Raspberry Pi with some Raspberry Pi silicon on it. This is RP1. The clue, in terms of, you think about how long these programs have been going on for, the clue is in the name. When we brought RP2040 out, it says RP2 on the box, and people thought that was short for RP2040. It's not. It's the second chip. So that's only took RP2040 only took 4 years. RP1 took 8. And really, what's the concept here? It's that you can. If you want to keep making Raspberry Pi faster, you have to go down process node. And the problem with going down process node, of course, is that your analog interfacing is basically big power transistors. They don't scale very well. A, they don't scale very well. B, they're a pain in the neck. on any process node, it's a burden. So you have this big burden of I/O, particularly like the MIPI I/O, for example, that you drag down, and making 3v3 nice ESD tolerant 3v3 GPIO pads, things like this. You have this burden that you drag after you as you go down process node. And so the kind of idea is, well, what if we took all of that interfacing, analog stuff, put on a friendly old process node, and 40 is just I love 40 nanometers. TSMC 40 LP is just the friendly. It's like a warm bath of a process node. It yields so well. I remember the first chip I ever did on 40 nanometers yielded 1%. Test chips all day get 2. If you test them quickly, you get 2 chips, 2 working chips at the end of the day. But like right now, that's 2009. So we're 15 years later. This thing's like a warm bath. So let's just do all of our analog on this lovely old process node with our friends at TSMC, and then let's connect it via PCI Express to the to a core logic chip, and then that core logic chip can run down the process node. So in this case, Broadcom did us a chip on 16, which is lovely, and it's what this is a chiplet architecture, right? We've been doing this for long enough that it predates the word chiplet. But what you call it today, usually with a fancier interconnect. I mean, the interesting thing about chiplets is usually people use some chiplet-specific low-energy per bit interconnect. But this is basically a chiplet. And the advantage of using a standards-based chiplet interface is that you can build the 2 chips in different organizations. That we just agreed. So we had RP1s plugged into x86 PCs. So I have PCI Express card with an RP1 on. And so you could do all your development against 2711 or against a Xeon, a shiny Xeon, and then know it'll work. And then at the other end, of course, you've got Broadcom developing 2712, and they can just say, well, look, we're just going to make a standards-compliant PCI Express interface, and we know that your standards-compliant PCI Express device will plug into it and work, and it did.
Yes. So can people buy RP1s by themselves? Like, is that a thing that's out there anywhere?
It's not a thing at the moment. I think we've not decided. There's quite a burden associated with selling a chip. I think if you look at the amount of documentation that went into RP 2040, there's a sort of a different level of collateral that needs to surround a device you're going to sell versus a device you're just going to use yourself. So I think it's probably, in terms of broad market, do I think it'll end up in the broad market? I don't know. I suspect kind of narrow. There's a difference between broad market. Sometimes in the chip industry, we call this white glove, where you have, if you have high volume customers, a small number of high volume customers, and most big mainline semiconductor companies are like this, right? They have fairly small numbers of fairly large customers, and what you do there is you can not generate so much collateral, but apply engineering effort to white glove, give people white glove service to kind of help them through the process of designing. It's possible RP1 might show up in a white glove kind of business model. Whether we are resourced really to support it as a general product, I don't know.
I've heard enough hackers thinking about hot airing them off of existing boards. So I don't, you can either cater to our market or not. People know what they're doing.
I mean, honestly, I am aware of, we've had some inbound inquiries, and, I'm aware of somebody who's wanting to use it to replace a $300 FPGA in a design, right? And so maybe you should be hot air gunning. Maybe you should be buying $60 Raspberry Pi 5s and hot air gunning the RP1 off them, right?
Oh, that's fun. It's the thing that's most intriguing to me actually is that idea of a PCI Express card that you can slap in your x86 and have all of that juicy input and output. I mean, it is non-trivial to get I2C and SPI exposed on an x86 machine. There's a couple of little USB dongles that'll do it, but the driver support is terrible.
Yeah, and the latency is. What's really interesting is how quickly you could bit bang. So we had somebody for a thing that we are working on. We had somebody bit bang something a bit I2, no, just sort of like just random serial protocol out of the PCI Express, out of a GPIO over PCI Express from the ARM core, and they were able to get sort of 5 megabits So it's interesting that you really can, it's not quite the immediacy of the GPIOs that are on, sort of think of a hierarchy. The GPIOs that are on RP2040 are literally one cycle away from the processor core. The GPIOs that are in 2708 or 2711, the monolithic historical Raspberry Pi parts, are a few, 10-ish cycles away from the core. These are a lot further away from the core than that, but not as far as you might think, actually, and it would be kind of fun to see, how what could you bit bash from your Xeon processor via a PCI Express card plugged into the backplane.
Yeah, I'm actually working another open source project, Meshtastic, and it's all about LoRa radios, and of course we talk to those over SPI. And one of the things that I've been doing is because it runs generally on embedded hardware, and I've been working on making it work with mainstream Linux, and trying to make SPI play with a desktop is just a pain. And so
they're actually very different worlds. They're very different worlds. The x86 Linux world and the most of the ARM Linux world actually they're quite different actually. So it would be a fun thing, and they're objects that exist, and there's always that question. It's always about resource. It's always about the number of people you help, because there's opportunity cost, right? We can't do everything, and the question is how many people are going to be delighted by our PCI Express card? If it's thousands, if it's tens of thousands, then then that's a very different proposition. So it's probably something for. As we're now getting to a point where Raspberry Pi 5 is pretty well ramped, the production rate's pretty well ramped, we can have a little bit of a think about what else we could be doing.
Cool. And mentioning documentation, like the support that you would have to do to put the RP1 out there as a product, I have to say that one of the things that, in the hacker community we most appreciate about all of the Raspberry Pi products is the outstanding documentation and educational resources and the operating system compatibility with the single board computers. All of this makes for a very pleasant, easy to get into kind of environment. And that, you would want that to be there. I understand that you would want that to be there for the
people
RP1.
Focus a lot on the hardware with the Raspberry Pi, but you've got to remember that the collateral. We have more software engineers in this building than we have hardware, than we have certainly board level hardware engineers. ASIC engineers, actually, we've got quite a lot of those. But it is, all hardware companies are really software companies. All ones that make hardware you might want are really software companies, and certainly that. I'm the guy who has the Raspberry Pi 1 on my desk, and a new operating system release will come to me, and I will be the person who boots it up, waits 2 minutes, and boots it up on my Raspberry Pi 1, my 256 meg Raspberry Pi 1, and then types top, because I want to know how much memory I've got left out of my 256 meg, and then waggles the window, picks the window up and waggles it. And it's like, waggling's got a bit slow. You see, there, that's what technically it used to be. 652 assembly language. Now it's waggling a window, but we still make technical contributions, even though we are the chief executive. So.
Yeah, well, who is your end user experience at the end of the day, right? It's window wagglers, and that's super important.
Yeah, and it's that's it. And who's it's really important about the end user experience. It's who is the end user? People like us.
Yep.
One way or another,
Yep.
and it could be adult enthusiasts, because we're all enthusiastic about computers, right? That's why we're here. So it could be adult enthusiasts. It could be professional design engineers, because of course we're all professional design engineers. It could be a child who is like I was when I was 10 years old, right? But it depends what stage of your life you're at. But there's a view of the other fruit company in its glory days as being a company that made the product Steve wanted. And that's all it did. And it just turned out that not without Apple Cube, not without failures, but by and large, there were a lot of other people who wanted the product Steve wanted. And that's you contrast that with the kind of focus groupy kind of, like, could you have focus grouped the iPad into existence? Yeah, I don't think you could, right? You just had to be and could you really have focus grouped the Raspberry Pi into existence? You just got to you got to have some conviction that this is a thing that at least one person. The nice thing about conviction products like the iPad is, at least one person wants it, because he's the guy who commissioned it. And the problem with focus grouping things, with trying to kind of do market research-based product design, is that you are exposed to the possibility that 0 people want your product. And that does happen, right? So that's how we've always approached it. And so that comes with then the obligation to have, well, what would I have found frustrating when I was 10 years old? Well, if I'd had to cobble my operating system together by applying 100 patches to something, and then the documentation was wrong, I would have found that frustrating. If I was a professional design engineer and I was trying to design a product into something and I couldn't find out how much RF it was supposed to be radiating, and I couldn't understand when I put it in the test chamber why it radiated too much RF, and I couldn't get my FCC certification, I find that frustrating. So it's all of this stuff has come from experiences, good and bad, that not just me, but are now 100 and we got 60 odd engineers in the building, 100 and some total employees. It all comes from experiences those people have had.
And maybe then this is a good time to bring up the IPO.
Because
because what that does is that gives you guys a lot more money to play with. And I think the question would be, and I think a lot of the community's looking at this thing, is this going to go into more hardware? Is this going to go into more software? Is this going to go into more accessibility? Where is it all going to go?
Right. So I should probably read from my piece of paper, shouldn't I? I have a little virtual piece of paper that's like things I say about the IPO. Look,
right.
I mean, this is somewhere where everyone knows that we had a look at this a couple of years ago, and we didn't like it for a couple of reasons. One of them was obviously the market. The other was the business. That the shortages made it very hard. The business actually performed financially okay, but from the market's perspective, it became very unpredictable, and kind of markets like predictability, almost like they'd rather have a predictable bad number sometimes, you think, than an unpredictable number that turned out to be good, right? So there were reasons not to do it. We've turned our attention back to it. We don't have a schedule for this. We have appointed bankers to help us think about it. We don't have a schedule for it. I think what we said is, when the market's ready, we want to be ready, because you can't wait until if you wait until the market's ready and then start running, if you wait till the window's open and you start running, it's going to shut and you're going to smack into the window again. So I think that's where we are at the moment. In terms of, I guess a couple of things. Think of it as a way for the foundation, which is our shareholders. So what are we talking? What would we be doing? We have a foundation that owns a regular commercial company. That's why I run a regular commercial company. The foundation would sell some of its stake in the company to raise the money. Why is that exciting? Because it lets the foundation continue to do. We've returned about $50 million to the foundation over the first decade, and it would let the foundation continue to do stuff for a long time, potentially do stuff at larger scale than it does. So that's kind of that would be the rationale if we were going to do this. I think there's an understandable concern that we will become somehow the Borg, or if we were to do this, that we would become kind of some sort of abstract, schematic, profit maximizing group of people, biomechanical people with little green lasers. I think the important thing to emphasize is that. Well, that would be a really dumb thing to do. It's such a stupid thing to do. This is not. This is an organisation that has grown by giving people things that they like, and it's given people. And as I said before, it's given people things they like by building the things we would like. And there's no obvious reason for us to stop doing that. Part of things that one likes is, say, the pricing. So people have used the word, I've seen the word, slightly rude word, I suppose, enshittification, used, which I think probably either implies that people think that we're going to put the price up or we're going to put the quality down. Mm-hmm. And of course, well, we build a business by building things which are low cost and really good. So why would we want to blow that business up by doing something different? So I think there's no obvious incentive. We've always been incentivized to make money in Raspberry Pi because we fund a charity that goes out and teaches hundreds of thousands of children how to code. Of course, we're incentivized to make money. Then we could be incentivized to make money after an IPO because, I would imagine the foundation will probably continue to own quite a lot of the business. Sure, you've got financial shareholders. We have financial shareholders now. So I think the way I'd encourage people to think about it is in terms of incentives. That nothing is going to happen that's going to change the incentives on us. And if nothing happens that's going to change the incentives on us, I struggle to see how we would do something, why we would end up doing different things in response to the same incentives. But the other one's wait and see. Wait 5 years. If we've made the product cost 5 times as much, and that's half the performance in 5 years' time, then I'll take you out and buy you a beer, and you were right. But I think my beer is fairly safe.
Yeah. I don't think I was suggesting it, and I do.
I know you weren't, but I'm replying to kind of like a stock internet comment.
Exactly.
And by and large, I've been super excited. I've been super pleased by how the vast majority of the community really understands what's going on here and understands what the motivations are, and that they're good motivations. And it's just probably just that one little strand of thought that I probably want to perhaps push back on a little bit.
And even that, you kind of have to keep in mind that that's just a sign that people love what you guys do and they love your products. And they're passionate about it. Yeah. And there's a little bit of fear when you hear that somebody's going public. And people don't necessarily understand all of that.
Yeah, and of course, it is an unusual organizational structure. It's an unusual organizational structure. So I think it's something we're looking at. I think if we did it, it would be a good thing. What the wonderful thing is, like, what was the narrow thing we were trying to accomplish with Raspberry Pi, right? We wanted to get people to apply to study computer science at the University of Cambridge. It was that parochial and that narrow. And in 2008, when we started this, the easiest way to get your child into the University of Cambridge was to get them to apply to study computer science, because it was roughly a 2-to-1 application ratio, which is nuts for a university. It's Turing as a university, right? 2-to-1 application ratio. Last year, I think it was an 18-to-1 application ratio. It's become the hardest subject to get into. Computer science at Cambridge is the hardest subject to get into at either Oxford or Cambridge. And that's not all us, right? It wasn't just we did this thing, but we were part of a movement that did that. People founding club networks and people lobbying the government to change the curriculum and lobbying the government to spend money on teacher training and all of these things, right? That's the legacy. That's what that $50 billion, our share of that success was bought by the $50 million that people gave to us for, if you bought a Raspberry Pi in the last decade, you were part of that, right? So people gave us that money. We gave that money. We paid that money up to the foundation. The foundation has done that work. And so that's why I'm excited about the prospect of an IPO, because it secures it, right? It secures at least another decade of impact, I would think, for an organization that probably, with the best, the foundation, look, the engineering is great. But when I'm old and grey, I'm not exactly young anymore. I got an MIT 35 under 35 award when MIT Tech Review 35 under 35 award when I started this thing. So I'm not as young as I was. But when I'm old and grey, the thing I will look back on with pride is most pride is that impact on young people's education, and that's the thing that we'd be talking about securing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So my question was going to be hardware or software or documentation, and your answer was foundation. So yeah, and because of course I'm a recovering engineer, sadly, but I'm a recovering software engineer. I'm a software engineer turned chip designer turned business dude. So I've done them all, and I do love the chips though. Because it's gambling, right? I don't gamble. I was in Nevada until the weekend and staying in a casino, and I don't gamble. I stay in a casino because the hotel rooms are cheap. But it is high stakes gambling, right? You spend about $1 million on a you're not far off $1 million out of pocket when you tape out. Even if it's 40 nanometers, right? 15-year-old process node, not far off $1 million to tape out. And then you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and I've
I've had zero. I mean, sometimes you say maybe you've got however many million gates, and maybe what you get back is the diode. I did have one that came back, and it was a 0 ohm link. So I had 2710 when it came back. So that's 2837, the chip that's in Pi 3. It came back as a 0 ohm link, and it was a 0 ohm link because the die has alternating power and ground pads around the outside. Those are bonded down onto the substrate inside the BGA and then out to balls. And at some point in going around the package, someone had lost track, had an off by one error, and had lost track of which ones were power and which ones were ground. And the consequence was that half the power balls were bonded to the ground plane, half the ground balls were bonded to the power plane, and the thing was a 0 ohm link. So sometimes, and the nice thing about that is at least it's a packaging problem, not a wafer problem. But it is a lot. It's a lot of. I commend it to anyone who gets the chance. And of course, there are with things like the Skyworks thing at Google. There are opportunities now to go do little chips. Kind of if you have an opportunity, you and your friends at college or something have an opportunity to go tape out anything. Go do it, because these are it's the bleeding edge of what humankind knows how to do, and it's still wonderful to be involved with.
So I want to jump in real quick because I promised David Tott that I would. We had him last week or the week before, and he brought up, when we talked a little bit about the Raspberry Pi IPO that might happen, and he brought up what happened with the Red Hat IPO, and he made the point that when Red Hat went public, they gave shares away to some of their contributors. And he said he thought that was the neatest thing. And as far as he could tell, that they were the only big company that had ever done that. And he wanted to make a plug that it would be nice if when Raspberry Pi goes public that there would be some remembrance for the open source folks that have helped them get there.
So this is an interesting, and of course you see this with Reddit. So you see, not giving away, but giving people the opportunity people with high karma, and long moderation histories, the chance to participate.
Sure.
So I think we're some distance away from that. I think giving away, and so what they're effectively saying is we are anticipating, I think, as I understand it, what they're saying is we're anticipating an IPO pop at Reddit, and therefore what we're giving away is your chance to participate in the IPO pop. So that's which is an interesting way. It's an intermediate way of thinking about it, I guess, in between giving stuff away. I think we're a way away from the deal structure. This is all comes into the heading deal structure, and there are and so I probably wouldn't speculate. I wouldn't speculate even on whether it's feasible to do what the Reddit things. I think broadly comes under the heading retail offer. It's fancy retail offer, the ability for ordinary human beings to participate at an IPO. So I wouldn't speculate on whether a retail offer would be feasible in an IPO as deal structure, and I can't really talk about it.
Sure.
The giving away thing is interesting. It sort of there's a question there about who to. Because in the end you need a metric,
right?
And I will go and look at what Red Hat did, because you need a metric, and it's I'll go and look at what they did. It must have been what kernel contributors, was it?
I went to look for the details of that, and my Google foo is failing me. So we may have to go back to David Tott, which the buffer bloat guy, by the way. David's great. Yes. I may have to go back to him and get more details from him.
That's it. But look, it's an interesting concept, because there is always this sort of feeling about where does value, where was value generated, where does value end up? And I will go and attempt to use my Google foo to find out more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that's always intrigued me about Raspberry Pis is your relationship with Broadcom, and there's some interesting things there. All of the chips, all of the CPUs have been Broadcom chips. Is that? Let's see. How do I want to ask this? Are we ever going to see a Raspberry Pi with a Rock chip on it, or a Raspberry Pi with maybe a RISC-V chip on it, or is it always going to be Broadcom?
Look, it's always been Broadcom because it's always been the right choice. right? And I was at Broadcom when we started, when the foundation was founded. I was at Broadcom, and it's always been the right thing. And one of the reasons, of course, it's always been the right thing is that there's this continuity of, you mentioned the backwards compatibility, right? And one of the things that being single vendor has enabled us to do is to effectively not multiply the software, to continue to support. We can support 2835, so the ARM11 design. It's still a flagship product because it's still the chip that's in 0, which is the lowest cost, which is a 0. Although 02W has taken the kind of 0W's flagship status away from it, 0 is still a flagship product. So we can use the same software team to support all the way back so we have a single common code base that runs on the VPU, the boot processor. What was originally the multimedia processor, but increasingly has been relegated as we've big software evolution in Raspberry Pi is the pushing of is the ARM is the moving from proprietary interfaces to all the multimedia components to standards based. So all this stuff in the blob where you now have Mesa. You have Mesa driving the graphics APIs. You have VFL2 driving the video components, and KMS DRM driving the video scan out. So anyway, so that's kind of thing that started off being quite central to the thing, where its role in the system has been whittled down and down and down to a point where it might as well actually be a microcontroller in there. It doesn't do much more than that. It's just a little scalar processor we happen to have. But anyway, having a single vendor has allowed us to keep a common code base there. That would be probably the biggest thing that one would be giving up.
Sure.
There'd be a lot of treadmill. We just not the only thing with single. We're functionally single vendor for Wi-Fi as well. We do use Infineon, Cypress, and Synaptics parts across the two different products. But they're actually kind of the same. They're both Broadcom derived. They both have come from an original set of Broadcom designs. So we actually functionally single vendor for Wi-Fi. Similar thing, right? When we have WPA3 support, for example, which is a really kind of recent thing that we're adding to the platforms, you only got to do it once because you only have one vendor. When you find a monitor that you can't talk to because the HDMI doesn't negotiate properly, you've only got to fix it in one place. And so there are, particularly lightweight engineering team, right? Everything, including the ASIC development, fits into 60 or 70 people. It's hard to be multi-vendor for something as central to the personality of your device as the core stock.
Sure. One of the neat things about the Raspberry Pi using Broadcom parts is the Broadcom support in the mainline kernel is getting better and better.
Indeed. I mean, the video. Well, I mean, the video core. We did a lot of work with Igalia. And this was originally Emma Anholt, is fairly famous Mesa contributor. Worked for me for a while at Broadcom and kind of stood up the video core, the original set of open source video core graphics drivers. On the back of the documentation release that we did back in 2014. And so we now do a lot of work with Igalia. She's moved on. We do a lot of work with Igalia on this. And it has had the side effect that it's generated a really robust set of open source drivers for, particularly for the HVS, the video scan out, and the video core video scan out engine, and Video Core 3D, which was the team I used to be on. Here in Cambridge, so I'm kind of very, very GPU kind of guy back in the day.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun that we can now, you can boot the Pi 4 with the mainline kernel. You can throw Fedora on it and generally expect that everything's going to work, or most everything's going to work.
Yeah. And it's another one of these things where people we've got to go appeal to people's appeal. Why is Raspberry Pi non-standard? Well, it's because we have a finite amount of engineering resource. You've got to believe that the direction of travel. Nobody wants to unnecessarily maintain a large body of closed source code inside the blob. If you can get that out in the wild, it gets us out of the way. It means that we're not the gate to innovation. So now, there's a gentleman, I think at Red Hat, who's been working on OpenCL support. And OpenCL hasn't been a priority for us. We haven't seen doing compute on our GPU as a priority, but he wants OpenCL. And he's been doing OpenCL, and the documentation is there, and the code base is there that he can submit patches to, and he's been working with the Galia. And so that's the price you pay. People need to understand there is no incentive on us to have closed source software. It's a boat anchor that we drag behind us.
Yep. I feel like we could sit around and talk for another hour without any problem, but it is an hour-long show, and I only have commitments for you guys for about 15 more minutes, so we need to wrap. And the first question I want to ask as we wrap is there anything that we didn't ask about that you really wanted to let folks know about?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of ground.
We did.
I think probably the thing that's worth emphasizing. It's worth just touching briefly on the shortage, shortage environment. We had a couple of years of really rough shortage, as you may have noticed.
Yes.
What's really lovely now is we're back in supply, and I think probably the thing that's pleased me most, given that we're coming up to our 12th, let's just call it our 12th birthday. The thing that's really good is you're probably aware of our pay locator.
Oh yes. The website that'll ding at you when somebody has pies that you can go jump on to try to buy.
Yeah, how green our pie locator is on our 12th birthday, and how green it is for an enormous amount of efforts happened at Sony over the last 8 weeks to get us from probably a production rate of 70,000 units a week for Pi, just for Pi 5 alone. We sort of up in the 900,000 unit total, but you've gone from about 250,000, say, a month to 350,000 a month of Pi 5 over the last 8 weeks. And what that's done is that's got you from keeping up and treading water to a point where we're actually starting to get free stock. You go on DigiKey, I think that's the best part of 3,000 8 gig Pi 5s on there, and that's oh god, it hurts so much, and it's just so good to be out the back of it, and it's good to be out the back of it with all of our product lines running now. 02W needs to catch up, but apart from that, we're fine.
All right, I want to ask, what's the weirdest or most surprising thing that you've seen somebody do with one of the Raspberry Pi products?
Oh, well, look, the whole thing is weird, right?
Well,
everyone using Raspberry Pis to do everything
yes.
is a bit strange. I'm going to need to get a new example, but I'm always drawn back to the cucumber sorter. The gentleman in Japan whose parents were cucumber farmers. They would spend a lot of their day, they're getting older, they would spend a lot of their day sorting Japanese spiny cucumbers into 23 different boxes, depending on how straight they were, how green they were, how many spines they had. And he built a TensorFlow, trained a machine learning model to do an initial classification, a little conveyor belt, little flippers that knocked him into buckets. I like it because it's whimsical, but I also like it because it's actually a scale model. We have people deploying high tens of thousands, individual customers deploying high tens of thousands of Raspberry Pis in industrial environments. And actually that's a toy model of what all of those things are, right? They're things that sit at the intersection of interfacing, particularly input, and particularly vision, output actuation, compute, and network. And that's the Lego. You talk about you couldn't have focus grouped it into existence. Nobody really had perceived that there was this whole Raspberry Pi shaped hole, this missing bit of Lego, this missing bit of glue that could stick all those things together and let people do projects. And so that's probably, it remains, I love it because it's whimsical and it's got cucumbers in it. But I like cucumbers. So.
All right, last two questions I've got to ask. It's sort of a contractual obligation. What is your favorite programming language and text editor?
Favorite programming language and text editor. Favorite programming language. It's going to be either 6502 or 68000. assembly language. They're both lovely, and they're just the programming languages of my childhood. And, BBC Basic is pretty good too, actually. But they're the programming languages of my childhood. I'd probably go with 6502 because I'm very time poor at the moment. It's the one that still has that haiku-like feeling that you could write 64 bytes of it and have some fun. So I could go with 6502 assembly language. In terms of a text editor, do still like entering at the command line in BBC on an emulated BBC. That actually the line editor's not bad on the BBC. Probably for production use, probably Visual Studio Code actually is a nice platform. It's kind of available everywhere.
Yes, and open source too. It's one of the neatest things that Microsoft has done.
Yeah, and forgive all the JavaScript. It's
well,
fine.
yes. All right, thank you so much for being here, sir. We do appreciate it, and boy, I think that was a great hour and a few minutes of chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, Elliot, what do you think?
I think it's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's some interesting observations about the IPO that may or may not happen, that everybody is a little concerned about.
Sorry to press on that, but everybody's thinking it.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I would say it's better to let Eben and the Raspberry Pi user group speak for themselves to those concerns, because obviously they've thought about it. Surely they've thought about it. You can tell by the answers that they've thought about it, and giving them a venue to answer some of those questions, I think is probably a good thing. It's always fun as well when you get one of these sort of hero products that you use so much to be able to talk to them and say, hey, it'd be really nice if X, Y, and Z. And so maybe we've abused our position just a little bit, but we got him in.
Yeah, no, I never hesitate to talk to fellow enthusiasts about your enthusiasm, right? Like when you've got something like that and you're like, I want this thing to have screw mount points. Never, ever hesitate to talk to people, because you never know who's going to be listening and who is on your team with that, right?
Yeah. I suppose that's true. So I think about the things that I'm involved in as a developer, and if somebody comes into our Discord and says, it would be great if we could do this. So, sometimes it's a thing that's been asked for 1,000 times and there's a really good reason. Yeah. But about half the time it's like, we never thought about that. That would be really cool. All right. Thank you, Elliot, for being here. I do appreciate it. Let's see. So next week on the schedule, we're talking with Julian Lamb about Node BB, which is it's forum software. It's modern, up-to-date forum software, and that's going to be really interesting to talk with him. Let's see. Do you have anything you want to plug, Elliot?
No. Read more Hackaday.
Read more Hackaday. There you go. I will agree with that. So the two things that I normally plug is, one, on Hackaday, we've got the security column. It goes live every Friday morning. Be sure to check that out. Follow me there.
Who writes that?
That would be yours truly. I keep up with the security happenings of the week, the things I find interesting. And then the other thing is the Untitled Linux Show, and that's still over at twit.tv. And the audio version of that is now available to the public. But if you want to be on the Twit Discord, if you want to get the video version, that's still in Club Twit. So go check that out. Thank you to everyone. We had a good audience in the Hackaday Discord. Thank you to those there. And we sure appreciate everybody on the download that listens too. And we'll see you next week on FLOSS Weekly.